By First Hawaiian Bank, Cabo Enterprises, and IT&E. We'll just jump right back into the KUAM News Zoom room. I hope it's adequately sanitized for you, Attorney General. We kind of run through in between guests, and we got the guys with the wands, and they wear the astronaut outfit.
It smells very clean here, Chris.
Yeah, I love the smell of Clorox in the morning. So, AG, we wanted to bring you on. There's just a whole bunch of stuff to catch up on. But first, ORDOT dump filing. What can you tell us about that? I know it came out of your office yesterday afternoon.
So we've actually taken the case to the Supreme Court of the United States now. We filed our petition yesterday. We're asking the court to review district courts or Court of Appeals out of D.C., their decision that Guam cannot pursue its claims because we filed too late. So, all we're asking for in that case is for the Navy to pay for its share of the $160 million that it's cost to clean up and to create LADZON. So I guess just it's the first time for my office that since I've been Attorney General that we've taken a case of environmental issues up to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Damn, we should ask the Admiral about
later this year. Yeah, sorry. And we'll find out whether or not the court accepts it, probably early 2021.
Are we asking them to pay the full $160 million?
No, we're asking actually if we survive this, there'll be an evidentiary hearing where we would figure out what their contribution would be based on when they ran the dump and when it was turned over to the government of Guam. But as of right now, they haven't contributed a penny to the closing and the cleanup over there.
Wow. So is there a ballpark figure, AG, that you guys think the Navy should fork up?
It's going to be that's where the meat of the argument is going to be, just kind of figuring out. We pointed out that they ran the dump for quite a long time. They didn't line it. They dumped chemicals in there for decades, and it's going to be a little bit difficult to figure out where their pollution stops and where the government of Guam may have started. But I think just based on the chemicals that they found there, it's not like your Roundup that you're buying from Home Depot. It's pretty toxic stuff,
and it could be traced back to the military, right? Yeah.
Very realistically, yeah.
Yeah, and how confident are you that the U.S. Supreme Court will actually take this case?
We pointed out in our petition that there's actually a split in the circuits, and that's one of the factors that the Supreme Court considers when deciding whether or not to accept a case. So we do think that it would be appropriate for the Supreme Court. It's not just Guam that's going to be impacted by this. This is a national issue. And really the main question, and it's extremely technical and nerdy, but it was a consent decree that we entered into under the Clean Water Act. And the court said, well, when you entered into the Clean Water Act consent, you were waiving, or your time to file a lawsuit under another law, CERCLA, started to run. So that's really the legal issue that we've brought before the Supreme Court to try to make a final decision for all the courts across the country.
We'll just run through the other, because I know the PFAS thing that where are we? Can you just give us a status on all the other environmental cases that you're pursuing?
PFAS litigation, there's a status here. They have status hearings. There have been, I think, over a dozen depositions that have been taken. We're in the discovery phase, and at that point, the court's going to decide which cases will proceed to trial, or at least to motions first. So Guam is one of maybe a dozen jurisdictions, states, or territories that have sued the manufacturers of that AFFF foam that's used for firefighting. And we're going to kind of try to get in line and see when we're going to have our day in court. But that case is proceeding. We should know by either the end of this year or next year when we can expect a trial date, or at least some kind of dispositive motion hearing. It's interesting. You have the Admiral on, and I remember back in the day when programmatic agreements kind of been in the news. We filed a lawsuit maybe 2 weeks ago to preserve NEPA, and just kind of bringing back all these memories. And Chris, you brought up, when are we going to get access to this? And I remember going to a programmatic agreement hearing back in 2011, and they had this billboard saying you can request access to all these sites, but no one had ever done that list before. So we said, okay, we would now like to access all these areas. And we went. I've never been to Fena before. They have a beautiful Laddystone set up there. But after that, they introduced a public access plan, but actually it made it more difficult to get access to a lot of these sites. So I'm hoping that with Admiral Manoni do that and make it a little bit easier for folks to get out there and to see. Haputo is another example where most locals have never been there and seen. They have an amazing laddie array out there. They have a probably the largest moose song I've ever seen in the back. And you kind of, I had an interest in seeing how the ancient Chamorros built their villages, and everything was a little bit unique. If you go to Halaan, they kind of built along the coastline. If you go to Haputo, they actually built like a U along the cliff line. So, there's just a lot of cool history. And I missed going on those hikes with Professor Bavakwa, but it was definitely an exciting time to get out there and to see stuff that you grow up on Guam and you don't realize it's out there in the jungle.
Right, and that's why I asked, and we'll get into that NEPA thing in a sec, AG, but I just wanted to share with you, I think it was last year, I had put in the request because, I flip channels, and there's that one channel, the propaganda, the military, where they just show all the military stuff, and they had this, again, it was this flag, hey, if you want to go and access any of the sites, call. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to go in and because they had put out some release and that was a response to some criticism and how they were handling the buildup, but it was one of those, like, they responded to the criticism and then they also said, like, hey, but we're also maintaining all these sites that you guys can come check out, and they named Fena. And so I actually really tried to gain access to Fena and to bring the camera so that I could say, hey, if they're saying they're taking care of it, let's show them and look at these, because I heard they're huge laddies up there. But our request was denied.
Maybe 4 feet.
Yeah, so we weren't able to.
One of the things that they changed, Chris, was that you can only go if you know someone who knows the way there. And of course, the only people who know the way there are folk who are in the military. At the time, Dave Lotz was very involved with our group and actually been to these sites. So he was able to lead our group. But that the one time we went out there, and I will never forget this, we actually brought one of our friends' grandfathers who grew up in Fena and who was moved out after World War II. And that was the first time he had been to like the river he grew up on since the war. And, he just sat there kind of off, and you could just tell it was a very emotional moment for him, but it kind of brings in Sumai too, right? They make that off, they're allowed to go to the cemetery once a year. So it was just one of those things where when you experience Guam history in that way, there's nothing quite like it. I can tell you have to walk up a pretty steep hill, and there are these gigantic laddie. There's no rocks around there, so they would have had to carry them somehow to the top of the mountain, and it overlooks the entire lake. So it was a very important person or very important things that happened up there. They're about the size of the Angel Santos Park, about the laddie from there. It's about the same size on the top of this mountain or hill. So
it sounds like you know the way, so we got to take a field trip. Real quick, AG, on the NEPA lawsuit, what can you tell us about that? And then we want to jump into the quarantine stuff.
Okay. So NEPA, there were proposed changes that would really limit public participation in these cases. It would also make it a much more difficult to challenge administrative decisions. So, we thought that really violated the spirit of NEPA. We were very fortunate when we sued the military the first time around to have Attorney Nick Yost, who was actually the head of the Council on Environmental Quality, and he was part of the initiative to enact NEPA back in the 70s. So he's come out very hard against these proposed changes and just agrees with the position that many, I think about 23 attorneys general from across the country have joined in the suit to stop the CEQ from basically gutting NEPA and allowing us to protect environment. I think environmental justice is another piece where they're taking out or they're amending cumulative impacts, which is very important for us in the Marianas because we have another exercise going on now. But they say, okay, just treat every project individually and don't look at the larger impacts that several projects that are going on in the same place would have. So those are the main issues that we had with the proposed changes. And
now to the meat of the sandwich, if you will. Why we really wanted to get you on.
I know, yeah. You let me talk about what you'd asked to talk about, and now we can get into what you
right. No, I mean, it's interesting talk there, AG. So, Bree?
Yeah, if you could bring us up to speed on all these petitions that are now being filed regarding people in quarantine saying that, they feel like they're in prison, they're in jail, and their civil rights are being trampled on.
I do want to start by just recognizing all the public health folks that are at these quarantine sites that are managing it, all the National Guard folks that are there also responsible for handing out things every day. I know it's not easy, and I'm sure with the recent news, it's probably harder. You're probably getting folks that are more and more irate. This has just become a very divisive issue, And it's unfortunate. It's not just quarantine, but all the public health orders that are have just been hotly contested. And it's not just a Guam issue. This is something that's happening around the country. And I do want to acknowledge that this is not an ideal situation. And for those who are in quarantine and are having to stay for the 14 days, I'm sure it's not easy. But this is something that the governor and the Department of Public Health has decided that is necessary based on the data and the trends that they were seeing. And I just wanted to just start by explaining what our office's role in all this is. Some folks think that we make the decision on who to quarantine, how to quarantine, where to quarantine. We are the legal advisors for public health. And we are advisory if we believe that there are issues with the process that don't comply with the law. We're going to step in and we will assist public health to the extent that we can. And we have been working with them very closely since these cases have started to come up. But to your comment, Sabrina, we've seen 4 or 5 petitions so far. There are hundreds of people that are in quarantine, that have been quarantined. And I'd say that the vast majority of folks are willing to. It's inconvenient, but that's just part of it. And if you allow me just to take a little bit of a tangent, I was reading my friend Julian Uggins. He wrote an article and he talked about, the legend of the fish that was eating Guam, right? And he talked about, the men, they couldn't do it. The women tied their hair together. And he has this line there, no offering was too small. And I understand this is very divisive nationally, but when you think about who we are as an island, who we are as a culture, I think back to that legend, and there are probably those on the side who are like, just let the fish run its course. It's only going to eat the central part of Guam, and we'll go. Right? I live in Chico. Don't worry about me. But I think just culturally, most folks understand the real danger that we're in right now, the threat that we're seeing, and hopefully with the measures that we've taken, we'll be able to start. I see the governor issued an executive order yesterday, relaxing a little bit more. So I'm hoping that we can continue to move in that direction. I do want to dispel this idea that quarantine itself is unconstitutional. That is absolutely false. We have a law that was passed that allows for public health to quarantine an individual without notice for up to 10 days. And after that 10-day period, we're required to go before a judge and to ask for additional time. That was enacted long before this started. So based on the science, and 14 days being the period that you need to make sure that someone isn't COVID positive and is not going to be spreading it. We have had to file 1 petition, maybe 2 petitions to request that the court extend that 10-day period beyond. For the cases that have been filed recently, they are being argued as we speak. So I can't really talk too much about it. But I do want to just share some of, I think, the confusion. So folks think that public health, they follow a process, they have processes. I encourage anyone who's going to be traveling or has family who's going to be traveling to make sure you have the most up-to-date guidance that has been issued by public health. Because what we're seeing is people coming to Guam who haven't read the guidance and who, as an example, will say, well, I believe I'm a critical worker and therefore I qualify for home quarantine. And that's not what the process says. There's a whole, you have to have a letter submitted by your employer to the Director of Public Health. The Director of Public Health will then pre-issue you a letter. And then when you get to the airport, that's when you're given the opportunity to quarantine at home as a critical worker. So, look at what the procedures are. And public health is not trying to violate anyone's constitutional rights. But if you don't like the outcome, that doesn't mean that it's illegal. It just means you don't like the outcome and you disagree with the decision.
There was something that Jackie Terlahi had said yesterday regarding legal representation, I believe, of
Right.
people that are in quarantine. They have a right to legal representation.
To be paid for by
So-
public health. Right?
Yeah, something along those lines.
Yeah.
And asking why isn't the AG representing or providing this legal representation?
I think we're just in a day and age where sometimes the soundbite is more important than being accurate. And I'm not the auditor. I know you had some real choice words. I don't have this lexicon, to come out and to have Jason put together a nice headline for this. This will probably be very hard for him to come up with a headline for. What the law says is that the court shall appoint an attorney at the government's expense to someone who is being quarantined, and the court is being asked to review the quarantine conditions. It does not say the government is going to hire attorneys for anyone who wants to challenge their quarantine. That's not what the law says. So to the extent that our office should be filing cases on behalf, we, as a matter of law, represent the Department of Public Health in these proceedings. Again, if they are not following the law, we have to get them on the right path. But we're not required to represent the passengers in these types of cases, and to say that the law requires that is just flat out wrong.
What would you make? What would you make, AG, of and we bring this up a lot, when Linda DeNorsi was the public health director? I know that she was going to court and doing what, according to her, she needed to do to ensure that these people were being quarantined and it met all the parameters of the quarantine law. The name of it's slipping my mind right now. But we didn't see that continue. We saw it a couple times, and that was one of the arguments that these attorneys are making, is that, yes, like you said, the government of Guam can quarantine people, but there's a whole procedure for it that they weren't following through with. I mean, something as simple as forgetting to do the paperwork. It looks like that's opened the door for a lot of these cases.
That's what happened, Chris, and I can tell you that is actually the first case that I argued as the Attorney General personally. Was the very first petition to quarantine travelers from Manila when the governor issued the executive order in public health said we need to stop all flights from quarantine passengers from Manila. So that I were at that hearing with Linda, and after that hearing, we looked at the other laws. So under Chapter 3 of Title 10, there is a process for voluntary quarantine. And we told the director, you can give them the choice of either voluntarily quarantine, and if they do, we don't have to file a petition every 10 days. And we heard one case, they had talked about filing another. At that point, the court had actually appointed public defender in those cases, as was required by law. And I think most of them just said, we'll ride it out, 10 days, I got 4 more days, and then I can go on my way. And at that, and just 6 months is a long time in COVID-19 world, right? I mean, you think back to March and just where we're at, the panic, and you look at now with 40 cases yesterday. I mean, and to be asking to revert back. And I just want to point out, one of the judge issued a decision in the customs officer case last week, and she recognized that public health said we allowed residents to quarantine at home, and part of the reason why we've seen a surge is that they weren't following it. People were given the opportunity to quarantine at home, and they were going out, they were posting things on social media, they were out at bars. And again, I'm not an epidemiologist, but if you look at the trends and you look at the graphs, I mean, something happened. And if you look at the time frame when we started relaxing these restrictions, I don't think it's a coincidence, and you don't have to be a scientist to see when we started to relax things and when we started to see an uptick in cases. So at the end of the day, we do have to put a lot of faith in our public health officials, that they're going to be looking at the data, they're going to be making the best try. And I'm just hoping that we can try to come together a little bit more and support the folks, because they're not doing this out of ill intent. I'm sure that everyone would rather not have to, would rather not have to be quarantining families if they could avoid it. And I'm hoping with the tests, I've heard or seen stuff that there's emerging technology that we can start relaxing a little bit more, but we're just not there today.
Okay, G. So we're good. You think you're going to win the cases?
I mean, we'll see. I can't really comment on that, and we'll see what the judge has to say. But so far in the customs officer case, he just recognized the need right now to quarantine. In that case, he didn't walk out of the hotel. I mean, the judge ordered him to finish his 14 days. And,
right.
Because she had language about whether or not they were given the involuntary detention order, people have seized on that, saying all quarantine is illegal. And that's not what the judge held. She just said the public health needed to make sure at the front end that they were explaining to people, you're going to be quarantined. You can either agree and do 14 days, or you cannot agree, and we're going to hold you for 10 days and then bring you to court after that. And I think most people in that situation, as much as it's an inconvenience, would just prefer to ride out the 14 days.
Right. All right, AG. Well, thanks for your time this morning.
Was there anything else you wanted to get out?
No, I think that's okay. And, I don't have 45 minutes, but
we can give you more if you want.
No, I appreciate an opportunity to come on again. I just think that we're really at a time where people are are profiting or really stoking this divisive language about, everyone's constitutional rights are being violated. And it's not, let me make one more point. Chapter 19, which allows for the quarantine without notice, is limited to public health emergencies. So if we were not in a COVID-19 era, it's not like public health could go to your house and take you out and drag you to a quarantine facility. It just so happens that we're in a public health emergency that's been going on for several months now. So it is actually extremely limited in terms of when public health can do it. It's just these circumstances justify it.
So if the governor lifts this public health state of emergency, there would be no more quarantine.
We would not be able to proceed under Chapter 19, and under Chapter 3, you have to request voluntary compliance. And this happened, and our office has had to file before in tuberculosis cases, where you have people who are extremely contagious, they're not taking their medicine. You try to get them to comply, you try your best, and if they can't comply, then there's a court proceeding that you have to follow. And one of the things you're required to show is that you've attempted to get voluntary compliance with the quarantine conditions. So, we would go back to Chapter 3. I don't believe, in talking to Linda and other public health officials, we've ever had to use Chapter 19. This is that I think that they've had to do this quarantine without notice. And it doesn't mean that it's unlawful. It just means, fortunately, we've been spared having public health emergencies like COVID-19 in the past.
Right. All right, AG.
I'm sorry,
Sorry?
was that a yes or no?
What was the question? Sorry.
That in order to have these quarantine facilities,
Yes.
that a public health
There has to be a
okay.
declaration of a public health emergency in order to proceed under Chapter 19.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Leevin.
Thank you.
Wash
All
your
right,
hands.
take care.
Let me know about that field trip. Wasn't kidding.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll go with you if you guys go.
Yeah, okay. So, okay. Does he have like a badge or something? He could just be like, "Oh, dude, just let us in."
He's the AG. He's probably the last person. No, and then the media.
Yeah,
So
okay,
we're on the
so-
same hell no list.
All right. Looks like we might have to pull an Angel Santos. I'm down. It's 9:22 and take a short break. Mary Rhodes from the Guam Hotel and Restaurant Association coming on as, again, the public health, the state governor's